another episode of Two Sisters of a Certain Age, Conversations with a Therapist and a Doctor. I'm your co-host, Judy Grant, licensed marriage and family therapist.
And I'm your co-host, Dr. Sophia Grant, board-certified pediatrician and board-certified child abuse pediatrician.
So, Candy, before we get started with our awesome guest, what did you do last night? I'm kind of curious.
Well, I have been, my sewing machines are on my dining table, and I am in a very creative mindset. And I downloaded a pattern from the internet. It was free, and I made an apron. I upcycled a tablecloth that I got at the thrift store. Because, sometimes the aprons that wrap around your waist, if you're wearing a blouse and you're finishing up, you might get grease on your clothes. This one, it's like a tunic. So I absolutely love it. And I think that's going to be everybody's Christmas gift.
I think so.
Yeah, it's really cool.
I was about to ask if you were going to be taking orders.
Yeah, I think I'll make some. Yeah, it's cool.
Okay, that's great, right? To have those creative juices flowing,
Yes. Yes.
So as we're thinking about creative juices, I think our guest is a great example of that. Candy, would you like to introduce Joy to everyone?
Yes, this is Joy DeMichelle. She is an actress, an educator, and an intimacy coordinator, and she's also the proud mother of a new graduate from college.
Oh.
And she is a Trojan mom, just like I am. So, so she is our second Trojan mom on the podcast. We had Kathy Shirley talking about taxes a while back, but I wanted to welcome Joy on because, I knew she was an actress, and then I heard she's an intimacy coordinator, and that's something I've been hearing more about. So I thought she would like to talk to us about what that entails, and let's see where it goes from there. Hi, Joy.
Hi, Joy.
Hello.
So nice to have you here. Thank you so much for joining us at TUSOCA. We just love having our guests and love exploring, what they do, how they do it. And, it's just a pleasure to have you join us this morning. So thank you
for having me. Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Thank you.
So where do we start? You got a lot of things going on.
I do. So let's start with what an intimacy coordinator is, because a lot of times people are like, what is that? And when I say it, a lot of times they think that I'm talking about intimacy within personal relationships.
Right.
And that is not it at all. There are people who are intimacy coaches that you may call upon if you have a personal relationship between you and the person you're in a relationship with. However, what I do is for film, television, and theater. And it is really, it goes beyond sex and nudity, intimate touch and sexual violence. It also goes into familial intimacy and also medical intimacy. Because when we see these roles on television, we don't always think about the fact that, oh, that is a human being who is being put into this position to portray this role for our entertainment. So how do we make things safe for them? There was a time when it was just go figure it out for the actors, and there was a lot of harm being done. There was a time when directors didn't have any parameters and they would take advantage of situations. There have been conversations around, remember I don't know if you saw the movie, but The Last Tango in Paris.
Yes.
So that was an underage young woman who was actually violated and didn't realize that she was violated until much later. So there have been lots of harm done. And in 2016, HBO made it a requisite for all of their shows to have an intimacy coordinator. From the show The Deuce. There was an actress, Emily Mead, who was playing a sex worker on the show. And when the second season came, the scenes got even more spicy. and she asked for somebody to step in and help her with this because she's like, I'm portraying a sex worker. I'm not a sex worker.
Right.
So we
Right.
need to have a distinction between the two and a language. This role is not necessarily a brand new role. There are people who have been doing it for years, but without a title. So oftentimes it would be like, let's say you have somebody who's just has a great amount of empathy and emotional intelligence, and they're on set and they're like, ooh, this doesn't look right. They may step in and help. That may be somebody in
Mm-hmm.
wardrobe or somebody in makeup. So it's been going on, but during the Me Too movement, it really became something that got a lot of attention. And I just want to name the fact that it's been happening prior to that. Like just like the Me Too hashtag was a thing before it became a thing,
Exactly.
Sure.
right?
Sure. Mm-hmm.
So I want to name that it didn't start with how can I put this? There's been a significant amount of gatekeeping and not a lot of people of the global majority had been included in the conversation early on. That has shifted, that has changed, and now that is a part of it because cultural competency is also a part of intimacy.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're doing a piece that involves heightened racial
Yeah.
topics,
Yeah.
you're asking a person to draw upon some directors might ask a person to draw upon personal experiences, which you should not be drawing upon personal experiences.
Mm-hmm.
But if that happens, how do you have closure around it? How do you
Right.
de-roll? How do you stop the conflating of what's real and what's imagined? Because as you know, Judy, the body doesn't know the difference between imagined and real trauma.
Mm-hmm.
So if you allow your imagination to go all the way there, you may live with that as if it's your trauma to live with.
Right.
So
Right.
we step in and put parameters and guidelines around it so that the actor is healthy at the end.
Wow. As you're talking, I've got so many thoughts. I was thinking of the documentary that Brooke Shields recently did,
Mm-hmm.
where she talked about her roles and being sexualized, and in the movie Endless Love, she had never, you know, had sex before.
Mm-hmm.
And the director is saying, you need to look like this, you need to look like that, and she's like, I like, what does that mean? And she said something about him squeezing her foot, squeezing her toe, so she would have this look
Facial
on her
expression.
face. Right. And like how just traumatic that would have been for her as a young woman, not even an actress, just as a young woman, and thinking, is this what intimacy is like? And so I see a lot of confusion there. I see this, when you bring up the racial piece, a lot of trauma that can be triggered when you're asked to do something, or trauma from the experience itself. So this is just fascinating.
You know, and one of the approaches that is a standard approach is to desexualize the language, right?
Mm,
So if you do have a young person, it might, like you said, it might be their first kiss ever. And that's happening on screen in
right.
front of people, and there are cameras. And
Yes.
that's an intimate thing for them. And so that imprint that gets left on them for the rest of their life could be damaging, right?
Right.
So
Right.
how do we desexualize it, and how do we make it so that we make sure that everybody's boundaries are in place? So
Mm-hmm.
part of it is to talk about boundaries and to talk about consent. Um, and theater is, I want to also name that there's a difference between the title in theater and a difference between the title in film and television.
Mm-hmm.
So in film and television, it's an intimacy coordinator. In theater, it's an intimacy director. But a one that you will hear across the board is an intimacy choreographer, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
so the choreographer, when you are coming in as a choreographer, you are literally choreographing the movements that are going to be made.
Right.
And that is so that there is no element of surprise on the human's body, because
Mm-hmm.
some directors feel like, oh, I can tell this one actor go and do X, Y, and Z to this person so I can get that real reaction. Well, that could be traumatizing. So we talk about the boundaries and we talk about what's going to happen. Because if it's in theater, it has to be repeated 8 times a week, right?
Yes.
So it has to be the same every single time. It has to be repeatable, and it has to be agreed upon. So it's
Okay.
not just something surprising. So there are boundaries in place now.
So
hmm
I have a question. Do the actors agree upon the limits, or do you tell them what the limits are?
Your boundaries are not negotiable.
Okay.
Right? So your boundaries are your boundaries. So basically, the process of how I work is very collaborative.
Yeah.
I don't come in with a preconceived notion of, I read the script and this is how I see things to be, because that's not my position. My position is there to advocate and to help the actor through the process, not to put my creative vision on it, right? However, I do come prepared with a creative vision in the event that the director is stuck, and in the event that the actor is stuck and they're like, oh, well, we really didn't think about this. We really don't know how to do it. I have an idea, right? So first speak with the director about what their vision is. What is it that they want to see happen? Then I talk with the actor about what their vision is, because because I'm an actor, I respect actors and I don't treat them like they are puppets and just do what I say do,
Yeah.
right? What's your vision? What are your thoughts about this thing? And then what are your boundaries? And a lot of times actors have not even thought about their own personal
Mhm.
boundaries,
Mhm.
because we as human beings, one, don't oftentimes think about our boundaries. Then two, us as Black bodied people oftentimes don't think about our boundaries, because some people have been raised in such a way that boundaries aren't respected. If you have
Yes.
boundaries, oftentimes in our culture, people think you're being disrespectful.
Yeah.
So oftentimes we just kind of move on. So sometimes it's an introduction for the first time to people to say, what are your boundaries around this? And they really have to think about it, right? So I explained to them that their boundaries involve consent, right? And how to say no, to empower them that they can say no and not feel as though there are going to be repercussions for it. So making sure that there's some real psychological safety on set,
Mhm.
because um, actors are oftentimes made to feel as though if you say something, then you're going to be problematic. And if you're problematic, you're
Mhm.
replaceable.
Right.
And
Mhm.
Difficult to work with. Yeah.
yeah, and there's so few roles for certain people that they just go, let me suck it up. Well, the days of just go along to get along, they're over. And there are things in place to help you be creatively free. So I know that there's been some concern about the idea of, well, intimacy coordinator is going to come in and not allow us to be free, and they're going to take the spice out of it. Well, the truth is, the
There
intimacy
shouldn't be any
coordinator,
spice.
well, the spice that comes through in the scene,
Yeah. Okay.
not
Uh-huh.
Mhm.
not for the actor,
Uh-huh.
right?
Right.
But the truth is, you can get more spice in the scene if boundaries are in place. If actors feel safe, the safer
Mhm.
they feel, the freer they feel, because they know, oh, this is not, if okay, let me back up a little bit. So an intimacy coordinator ideally should be brought in pre-production, before it even starts shooting. When there's an audition, it should be brought in at that time. Um, in the way it's even written in the breakdown. Then once the actor gets the role, an intimacy coordinator should be in touch with the actor so that they can have a nudity writer. And that gives them a certain amount of time to be able to read what is expected and to think about if they really want to do that or not,
Mhm.
as opposed to just showing up and then they go, okay, we want you to be nude in this scene, or we want simulated sex on this scene, or let's just say it was simulated sex, it's all it said, but they didn't say what kind. And that person's boundaries may be, oh, I don't want to simulate oral sex. I don't want to do that. So that would be discussed in the nudity writer, right? Once you agree upon what's in the nudity writer, you then always have the right to for your boundaries to change on set. And you can say, I don't necessarily want to do that. the intimacy coordinator can work with you and the director to
Mm-hmm.
see how we could possibly get something that works. But because you signed that rider, the production does have the right to let you go as well. So that is protections on both sides. It's protections for the production, and there are protections in place for the actor as well. I think, did I answer your question? I know I just started
It's
rambling.
okay. No, it's all good information. Now, did you have to take any type of special classes, or how did you prepare to get this position?
hmm So first of all, I'm gonna go back to what even piqued my interest in it in the first place, and
Mm-hmm.
then I'll go into how I prepared for the position. As a young actor, I dealt with my fair share of feeling uncomfortable, I think it really is the most. The rule in this work is to make sure that even the most vulnerable person in the room is taken care of. Because a lot of times people, actors, come into this space with, oh, I'm free. I can do whatever. I'm fine with being nude. I'm fine with blah, blah, blah. Because some people have taught people that you should not have inhibitions if you're going to be a good actor, right?
Mm-hmm.
So in training programs, a lot of young people went through that. I dealt with that as well. You know, if you're doing a scene and you're supposed to be in a scene with your lover and you're supposed to disrobe, but then you as the actor, the person decides you want to go behind the scrim to disrobe, you're 22 to 26 years old in acting class, and the teacher is like, stop, 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 what are you doing? You're like, well, I'm changing my clothes, but aren't you at home? Isn't this your lover? You wouldn't go in another room to do that. If you were shooting this film, it would be shot this way, so you need to disrobe. That's a lot.
Yeah.
And so
Mm-hmm.
then that young person doesn't feel as though they have agency over their body, and they feel as though, okay, this is what I have to do to be a good actor. And that becomes the mindset that they move in through. So when harm is done, they don't even realize harm is being done to them until much later. Right.
Yes.
So, I, as a young person, was in some of those positions, and it really did make me kind of want to go, I don't know how much I want to do this anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And then
Mm-hmm.
once I became a mother, it really made me think about what kinds of things do I want to do. And I then became really fine with just being mama. And then coming back into it later on in life, the chances of somebody actually asking me to be nude now in life, slim to none. So, so,
So you're
so
protective.
so I'm feeling quite safe.
Uh-huh.
However, I know that there are a lot of young folks that don't feel quite safe. So
Mm-hmm.
when I heard about this, actually having a name and it actually being a profession, I then said, let me look into it. And as I was looking into it, I also want to name Ann James. She is a dear, dear, dear person in my heart. She's the first Black intimacy coordinator on Broadway.
Mm-hmm.
And I was watching her online because we happened to be in the same Facebook circle. You know how
Yes.
people are your
Oh, I
Facebook
know.
friends,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
you're like, oh, I don't really know this person, but what they're doing is interesting. And so she was always posting like, I just did this certification, I just did this certification, I just did da. I'm like, why is she doing all these certifications? I knew she had been a director, and then she rolled out, I'm now an intimacy coordinator. And so she created a organization called Intimacy Coordinators of Color, where she has assembled, not trained intimacy coordinators, but she's assembled those that have gone through training.
Mm-hmm.
And those who are interested who may not know what the steps are, because the main two training programs at the time was IDI and IDC. And they were quite expensive, and that's what I was speaking about the gatekeeping that was involved.
Yes.
Because most people of color, we're not just going to throw down $10,000 on a training with no guarantee that I can get work.
Mm-hmm.
We're just not
Mm-hmm.
going to do it. If I put this money down, I need to know that there's going to be a place for me when I get through with it. So what Anne did for me was to tell me all the different things that are needed to get to be qualified.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there's a difference between being qualified and certified in this
Yes.
industry, right? So these lots of organizations will certify people, but because you have that piece of paper doesn't necessarily mean you're qualified for every intimacy job.
Mm-hmm.
And this position really does require you to have a sense of knowing about yourself and also respect for the project. So for me personally, you have different kinds of intimacy. And if there was something that was involving a culture that I'm not a part of, I would look to one of my peers that's a part of that culture because it just makes it easier
Mm-hmm.
for the actor to receive certain information from somebody who is of their culture, right?
Exactly.
So I don't need to chase, I personally, this is not everybody, this is Joy. I don't need to chase the bag because I'm just wanting the money. I really want to do a service to the project. So I will give the job to another person. And in turn, other people have given jobs to me for that in that same way because we
Mm-hmm.
want to
Mm-hmm.
serve the project. Um, so, um, mental health certification is one of the things that you have to get. So
Yeah.
not that you are a therapist when you're on set, because that is not your job, but that you can, if you see some sort of traumatic experience that's happening, you know how to help in the moment and then direct them to a professional that can truly help them. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to be able to identify if something is happening because a lot of times people don't feel as though they have agency to speak up. And you can
Right.
see it in a person's body if their energy is shifting or if they're shutting down or they're not speaking up. You can see it. So you go in and you check in and see what's going on, right? Um, um, movement is something that is definitely what you need training in. And so I had training in movement from graduate school and all the other things that I did after that. Because in the choreography of it, you
Mm-hmm.
need to be
Mm-hmm.
able to speak that language and make sure that it does look beautiful and it does look engaging and like something that would be appealing to the audience to look at. Or if the story is of sexual violence, how do you create that story without there being any harm done? Right. So movement, the the official title of this came out of a lot of fight coordinators getting together and realizing that they have language and rules around fight coordinating, and there's respect for it. However, there's nothing around intimacy,
Yeah.
and it is just as dangerous. So that's
Mm-hmm.
how that
Mm-hmm.
grew. And then the other place that I did my training, I'll also name Chelsea Payson, Laura Ricard. They have an organization called Theatrical Intimacy Education. And so I did a lot of training through them. I did go to IDC and do a lot of their training as well. And it's an ongoing, for me, it's an ongoing thing because there's always something to learn about how to hold space for people um, in these different kinds of ways and even more creative ways of doing the choreography. Um, and because I've had experience on set, I understand, how to go to the first AD and what the DP does and all that sort of stuff. So if they're shooting, it helps to have that knowledge of what angle they're shooting from, what lens they're shooting on, so that you can help the actor when you're doing the coordinating or choreography for film and television. So you can help the actor know that, oh, your writer is being respected. If you, let's say, for instance, if the actor has said, I am fine with there being my back being shown or there being side boob being shown. However, I don't want my nipples to be shown. And I'm okay with my side of my buttocks being shown, but I don't want the cleft of my butt being shown. So all those things that are in that writer, it's the intimacy coordinator's job to make sure that those things are respected. So if I'm looking through the lens and I see, ooh, this is not in the writer what you guys are about to do, I then share that with the first AD, because that also protects the production. Because if the production is saying, okay, fine, we agreed not to do that, and they do it anyway, and it ends up in the final cut, that's a
Yeah.
problem, you know?
Yeah.
This is so fascinating to me. I remember years ago reading a story about an actress who didn't want her breasts shown, but for the scene she was wearing nipple covers and things like that. But she didn't trust the production, so she made her nipple covers outlandishly bright so that it wouldn't make it onto the screen. And so she was kind of advocating for herself, but how sad that she had to do that because there was no trust.
Intimacy coordinators have to do that sometimes too.
Mm-hmm.
So if you have a director, I haven't had to do it. I've had very respectful directors that I've worked with. But I do know people who have had directors that have given a tremendous amount of pushback. Those are the people that typically that don't want to work with an intimacy coordinator,
Right.
because they
Right.
want to speak how they want to speak, say what they want to say, do what they want to do, and it doesn't matter if I'm sexualizing you or making you feel a certain kind of way because I'm trying to get something out of you. And
Yeah.
so this is what, those people who we're hoping that all of that kind of culture is shifting and changing, and hoping that in years to come, this position won't even be necessary
Mm.
because it will be a part of the training that actors and directors and lighting people and costume people, they all get when they are younger, and it just becomes standard. And if it's
Right.
standard, then it's no longer necessary. So that is the hope. So yes, people have put like bright pink
Yeah.
and bright neon green things on their nipple covers to make sure that it won't be able to be used in post,
Mm-hmm.
because you don't know what they're doing with the camera when you're on the other side of it, right?
Right.
Yes.
And in writers, there have been celebrities. This is long before intimacy coordinators were a thing. But I remember seeing an interview with someone, and she didn't have a writer, but she had a contract. It's before the nudity writer was a thing, saying you can touch me here, you can touch me here, there, you can touch me here, you can touch me there, but you cannot touch me here, you cannot touch me there, you cannot touch me there. Now that's part of what we now do with a boundary check-in.
Mm-hmm.
But back then that was unusual. And people were like, oh, wow, she's being quite specific. Like, you can kiss me on my neck, but you can't touch me. You can't kiss me on my back. You can, because a lot of times people don't realize, let's say a person has a trigger around being touched on their neck.
Exactly.
And they're like, I don't like, we can still make this intimate, touch someplace else, but not my neck. Let's say it's somebody who's like, don't touch my hair. And that becomes a thing. And people are like, well, why can't I touch your hair? Well, that is not, as I said earlier, your boundaries are not negotiable.
Right.
You don't have to explain them. If you say it's a boundary, it's a boundary. You don't have to justify it. Can we just, we just want one hair pull, just one. That person said no. And so that actors will not have to get into a tete-a-tete with anyone. The intimacy coordinator just steps in and says, well, no, that's not within her boundaries. So let's find another way of making this happen.
What I've noticed recently is that I've seen interviews with actors, actresses who are talking about their intimacy coordinator and talking about having them be a part of the process. And in one case in particular, the actress shared how empowering it was to know what the boundaries were, to know what the other person's boundaries were, and to work with a coordinator. So it seems like, in that particular case, it was a very important piece of the work they were doing, and they had this great relationship with their coordinator, so they all felt safe.
It allows you to really be creatively free, because you don't have to worry about watching yourself and watching other people, because somebody else is doing that for you.
Right.
So you get to really be free. The boundaries are set. That other person knows, I don't want this to happen. I don't want that to happen. But these are all green lights. This is good to go. We can work in this space.
Mm-hmm.
And mistakes do happen, right? So if mistakes happen, we also talk about what are the ways to deal with that, right? We talk about that early on instead of waiting for a mistake to happen. Because if you don't know that you have agency, or you don't know that you have a way to pause things and say, I need to take a breather, or I need to talk about this, then you typically won't if you don't know that there's room for that. One of the main things, this is like common, this is not an industry secret or anything, it's just is what it is at this point. If someone's doing an intimate scene, as soon as that scene is over with, there should be somebody from wardrobe flying in with a robe. You should not have to sit there in between takes, or while they're adjusting lights, or they're doing a turnaround in your underwear, right?
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes there are some actors and actresses who are like, oh, I'm comfortable, I'm fine. Well, you might be comfortable and you might be fine, but the other people have boundaries too.
Right.
They don't want to see that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
you need to put something on, just so everybody is feeling respected. Making sure that there's a closed set, because on set there are hundreds of people, right, to make a scene work. And when you're doing the intimate parts, you want to make sure only the people that are necessary to shoot this scene are there.
Mm-hmm.
The live feed to the monitors needs to be cut, because you don't want somebody else with their phone looking at it. You don't want
Mm-hmm.
somebody else recording it. Production doesn't want it getting leaked,
Mm-hmm.
because it could ruin the marketing of the film.
Right.
And then you don't want to get it leaked because that person is vulnerable as well. So there are a lot of, even in theater, if there's a very, very intimate scene, they will oftentimes ask people to turn their phone, not just turn them off. I think there have been times where they've said, can you just leave your phone at a particular area?
Mm-hmm.
Because I don't know if you guys remember what happened with, oh my goodness, Jesse, the guy from Grey's
Oh,
Anatomy.
yeah. Jesse Williams?
Yes, Jesse Williams. Thank you.
What
Um,
happened? Tell me.
He was in
he
a show
was
on Broadway
Yeah, it was
about
in a show on
baseball.
Broadway. And he was nude. And people took pictures and it went all over the internet and it
Oh.
became a thing. So in protections of things like that, because you've got to be able to control that. Like,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
you don't want somebody coming to see the show one time and go, oh, that's what's going to happen. I'm going to be prepared. I'm going to come see it again. And I'm going to be prepared and I'm going to record that. You want to make sure that people are protected.
Right.
Right.
I'm
Right.
surprised they didn't think about that, because that was within the past year and a half.
Yeah, I think that unfortunately there have been a lot more concern about um, people who identify as female having protections more so than people who identify as male.
I was just thinking that. Yes.
So the protections are now balanced, right?
Mm-hmm.
And even part of intimacy is really, like, one of the things that I do if I'm working on a theatrical production, the first day is I help to set community agreements. So I come with a list of things that for us to discuss as a community, as a company, that are not allowed or will be allowed. And as a company, people also have the agency to say, well, can we also incorporate this as well? Right.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, pronoun use is something that has to be addressed, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because just because you think somebody should identify as one thing, does not mean that that's what they identify as. And if you do step in it, then how do we even correct that? How do we fix that so that we're not moving forward with tension, right?
Right.
So we address all of that in the beginning. Share your pronouns, and how are we going to, if somebody messes up, how are we going to address it instead of people getting upset and then tensions mounting, and you have a whole explosion about the coffee that was really about
Yeah.
Something
2
else.
weeks ago when the pronouns kept getting messed up, you
So
know?
this is the mental health piece of it that you're looking at,
Right.
and considering. And I had no idea that on set there would be somebody there to consider the mental health of the actors and actresses. So I don't know, maybe that's a nice little side hustle for me.
Hmm. Now in London, they actually, like, it's a mental wellness consultant that
Hmm.
is like really, really there. Now in the US, they don't really do that as much, but like it's like a real,
Yeah.
so I don't step in. It's my piece of it is just to be able to see it,
Right.
name it, and guide it to where it
Sure.
needs to be.
Sure.
But in London, there is somebody there for, okay, you've been guided to me, let's deal with
Right.
it.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
So, I'm taken aback many years, and I think it could have been like on the Tonight Show, which is clearly dating me. But there was an actor talking about the fact that in a scene, a male was nude from the behind, and how they did not want to be nude in that scene. They did not want to have that filmed. So they had what they called a stunt bottom.
Hmm.
So someone stepped in, and it was this, everybody was laughing, they didn't understand. But it goes right back to that person creating boundaries for themselves, even many, many years ago. This is not okay with me. If you want a bottom, you're going to have to find another bottom to play the bottom, because I'm not doing it.
Hmm. Uh-huh. Yeah. And not only sometimes because of their in their discomfort with having their body seen, it can sometimes be their discomfort with how they perceive their body looks,
Mm-hmm.
right? So, and sometimes it could even be a production call where they're like, let's put a different bottom in there because this bottom is a little bit more attractive than the other bottom. I think you all have probably seen, I know I'm not going to name the show, but I remember being younger and there was a film that a person, we could see their bottom. And then afterwards, everyone was like, that's not how their butt really looks. That looks way better than blah blah blah. Well, sometimes they do that,
Right.
Mm-hmm.
and it's, there's nothing wrong with it. It's just, if it's a boundary, it's a boundary. And there's so much pressure. There's too much false pressure on the aesthetics of the body,
Mm-hmm.
that intimacy is opening space for as well, because all the isms, we've got, sexism, ableism, um sizeism, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so when people are I've learned that a lot of um healthy people, because I was raised with the by saying the word fat was a bad word because it could make somebody feel bad. So, you'd say, oh, that person has girth or they're portly or whatever. You'd find some other way of saying it. But now there is no shame. So people who are in that space, they say, I'm a fat person, right? They own
Yes.
it. They have agency over it.
Mm-hmm.
However, it's not to say that fat people cannot be sensual, cannot
Mm-hmm.
be in intimate spaces.
Yes.
So there is space for that now. So you will start seeing more intimate scenes of all different body types, of all
Mm-hmm.
different kinds of people.
Mm-hmm.
So even between people who have disabilities,
Yes.
having intimacy, because those are stories that have to be told too. And so that's why I was saying earlier that if that is not my space, like there are different people who actually specialize in being neurodivergent. And so those people may come and work on a particular show where that is the case, and they're going,
Mm-hmm.
okay, I'm bringing a skill set to this. So how are we going to deal with this intimacy, right? Um, there's sexual violence. That's typically with a fight coordinator and an intimacy coordinator. Sometimes you will have an intimacy coordinator who's also a fight coordinator. When you have somebody who has those dual things, they should be paid separately. They should not be paid for one job. I'll say that again. They should not be paid for one
Yeah.
job.
Yeah,
Right.
I've heard about, one salary being shared between two people. Oh my
Mm-hmm.
goodness.
Yeah. So, and it's just, I know people feel like productions sometimes feel like, do we really have to pay for this? But the thing is, you're protecting yourself
Yes.
Right. Right.
and you're protecting the actors that are giving so much.
Now, Joy, do you think you could have done this as a 25-year-old woman? Or do you need to be a woman of a certain age to be able, you've been through some stuff. You've done some
Mm-hmm.
living, to
Um,
stand up to these directors.
that's an interesting question. And so the reason why I say it's an interesting question is depending on the show, I do think that young people can do it with the proper training. I do.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, but personally, and this is, I could possibly get some backlash for this. I do feel like life experience and wisdom and discernment helps in this space a lot because you can you can look at timing, right? So you know when to bring, like if you want to, there's a concern you need to bring to somebody, but there's other stuff going on. You got to know when to like, okay, I
Mm-hmm.
need to back off. This is not the right
No.
time.
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't really have that, you can interject yourself into something where it's just now you're being a problem. Now it's
Right.
just like,
Right.
oh my goodness, like, do you see that we're trying to deal with this light situation right here? And you're
Yeah.
telling
Exactly.
me that this person, their feelings were hurt? Like, really? Like, can we deal with that later? So you have to be able to figure out when to bring it. You I do feel like young people can do it. I
Mm-hmm.
do. And I know some young people who do it quite well, like really well. There are young people that I have given jobs to because I know that this particular subject, they might make that person feel even more comfortable
Right. Maybe more
because they're
relatable.
also, yeah, more
Mm-hmm.
relatable
Mm-hmm.
because they
Yeah.
are young. And it's funny because I have we have young adults. So because I have a young adult, I know a lot about what happens in those spaces and who the celebrities are and who's doing what and blah, blah, blah. So the funny thing is oftentimes when I'm working with somebody and they might be having a hard time with something, I may make reference to something that is a part of popular culture and they just crack up because they're like,
How'd you know
I be
that? Mhm.
exactly.
Yeah.
How do you know who that is?
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
how do you know that line from that thing? So
Mhm.
it
Right.
becomes, um, yeah, I think young people can with the proper training, absolutely. Um, but I do think that experience helps, and that's part of what I do know that IDC does is they will give some people an opportunity to shadow. And if they're shadowing somebody, then you get an opportunity to learn
Sure.
as you're shadowing,
Yeah.
What is
which
IDC an acronym for?
intimacy directors and coordinators is
Okay.
an organization.
Okay.
Um,
Joy, I have one more question. As a woman of a certain age, I'm wondering how, if there's any difference when working with actors who are of a certain age. Does the intimacy look different? Do you coordinate that differently?
that's interesting. I don't. You mean the choreography of it?
Yes, I mean, I
Like the
think,
way it looks in terms of what's on screen?
well, I'm also thinking of the fact that generally in society, people think when you reach a certain age, that whole like sexual part of you goes away.
Mm-hmm.
And we're
Mm-hmm.
here to say, no, it's still very much
Absolutely.
alive. So, are you thinking about all of these things, the actual coordination and the perception of sexuality when you reach a certain age?
So first of all, it's in the writing, right?
Mm.
The real issue is we have to have a lot more writers that really acknowledge that when you get to a certain age, your sexuality doesn't go away.
Mm-hmm.
And me as an actress, that's something that I'm like, can we get the good stuff, please? Can we, why are we just like, the
Right.
grandmas and the moms
Yeah,
who don't
Mm-hmm.
have,
attorneys
right?
and sexless adults. Yeah.
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 Right. So first of all, it's in the writing. And then it's in the direction as well, because the directors can choose to put more mature people in those positions.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, we have been so conditioned
Yeah.
when it comes to ageism and sizeism and colorism
Mm-hmm.
that a lot of times when the writers or directors get their shot, they go for what they think is going to have the biggest box office appeal, as opposed to what will have a more universal appeal.
Right.
And I personally think that if they shoot for the more universal appeal, they will get the box office.
Mm-hmm.
Um, because I think that people are ready to see something new. I think that people are tired of the same old, same old, same old. And we all know that your sexuality doesn't die. It's even, I know people in their 70s who are like, I'm looking for a partner. I want I
Mm-hmm.
want someone in my life. Where are those stories?
Right.
And those
Right.
stories being told where it's not in a comedy or a
Mm-hmm.
joke,
Mm-hmm.
it's
Mm-hmm.
a real story. I think that there's so much work to be done when it comes to telling not just stories about age, but or stories about different ethnicities. Man, this is there's a door that's being opened that is very inclusive for gender, but I don't feel as though it's inclusive for older Black people.
Yeah, that's true.
And I would love to see that door be opened. I mean, think about it. Before we got onto the live here, and you mentioned Bridgerton.
Mm-hmm.
I love that show. I don't see any intimacy with any older people on that show.
That's true.
Yeah, that is
It's
true.
all the young people,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
you know. So there's a lot of work to be done. There's
Yeah.
a lot of work to be done.
And I thank you for doing the work that you are
Yeah.
doing
Yeah.
and for
Oh, thank
making us
you.
all comfortable um, when watching as a viewer on my television or in a movie theater, and for the people actually acting the parts. So thank you so much for doing what you do with such empathy and grace.
Thank
Yes.
you. It's my
Yes.
pleasure.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. This has been eye-opening
Mm-hmm.
and fascinating. And I really hope that there are more people like you and more people who represent all walks of life, all races, all ethnicities. Um, but this has been really interesting. And I, if this is an offshoot or a product of Me Too, yay, because we need it.
Yes.
We really do need it. And sadly, the people I have heard talk about needing an intimacy coordinator have all been women. And
Mm-hmm.
I see pushback from the men. So
Mm-hmm.
thank you, Joy. And,
Mm-hmm.
you know, Go
May I
ahead.
say one more thing?
Yes.
Absolutely.
This is just, it just popped into my head because you are a pediatrician.
Yes.
And so when we talk about, I just want to make clarity around medical intimacy. When I mention that, a lot of people don't think about, oh, this is a birth scene,
Yes.
right? What does that mean for the person who is
Uh-huh.
giving birth to have another person who they don't know between their legs while they're acting this scene? So a lot of times we might see that in a script and think, oh, that's not a big deal. But it is a big deal because it's a vulnerable position to be in.
Yes.
So just think about all the times that you see anything in a movie or in a television, and it's a child who sits on a parent's lap or any of that. That is intimate because those are two people who don't know each other,
Yes.
who are being asked to do something that is intimate in terms of family.
Right.
And so if we can have more people advocating for making sure that people are safe, I think the easier it is to for people to want to put that into their budget. Because a lot of times people are just like, we don't have it, we don't have it. You have to make space for it.
Right. Right.
Mhm.
I didn't even think about a child sitting on somebody's lap.
No.
I mean, I tell parents not to let their kids do it, but I didn't think of it in terms of having to choreograph that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a negotiation that has to happen. And too often parents who have and we're seeing in these
Yes.
documentaries and things, parents want their kids to have that part. So they're like, just do what the director tells you to do,
Right.
honey.
Yeah. Yeah.
And kids get damaged by it.
Yeah.
So we've seen symbolism in things in this documentary about Nickelodeon,
Mhm.
where kids in hindsight, they're like, oh my goodness, I didn't realize that's how I was being objectified. But if there was somebody on set to say, okay, you know what, is this really the story that you're trying to tell? And if there is a parent that is advocating for their child, how can they do that without having to go and fight with producers? If there's an intimacy coordinator in place, they can speak to that person can speak to the producers on their behalf. And families don't have to go through all the stress that they go through when the kid is like, but I really want to do this part. And the parent is like, but this thing that's happening is not healthy.
Right. Right. I feel
Yeah.
like we could talk. I have so many other thoughts and questions.
Yes.
Now that you brought up the documentary,
Yes.
I'm thinking of that. But we just really want to thank you for joining us this
Yes.
morning, Joy. It's been a pleasure to have you.
Thank
And
you.
just to share a little bit about this, because this is definitely a bit of an unknown, and people wonder, how does that work?
Right.
So thank
Right.
you for shedding light on that.
Thank you.
It's been really lovely to have you with us this morning.
And Joy, what are you working on right now?
I'm currently, it opens today.
Yay.
Jelly's Last Jam at
Mhm.
Pasadena Playhouse.
Oh,
It is so good. I mean, so everybody should come see it.
When does it run till?
yes.
It runs until the 29th of the month.
Okay.
And
We should see
it
that too.
is, my daughter came to see it the other day with one of her friends, and her words were, she said it was hypnotic, erotic. She used another word. And then she said, black, black, blackety black. When it was over with, I was proud to be Black.
Ooh.
So it's so beautiful. It really is. It does have some, if you know the musical, it tells the life story in a magical kind of way about Jelly Roll Morton and what it meant for him to be a musician at that time, and how the things in his life that he went through that made him the kind of man that he became. It's beautiful. It's fun. It's dancing. It's singing. It's great acting. The tap dancing is otherworldly. The voices are magical. It's so good. The visuals, it's beautiful.
Now, do you go every night to watch it?
No.
Okay. All right.
We had previews
Uh-huh.
that just ended. So during that time of previews, there's also rehearsal during the day and then preview. So I was going during that time, but once
Okay.
it opens,
You
I
don't
don't have
need
to
to
go
continue.
anymore.
Okay.
And unless I'm called in for something.
Okay.
I don't need to go anymore
Okay.
because the show's been set at that point. The director has set it. It belongs to the stage manager at that point, and they just run the show and they only call me if they need me.
Okay.
And more than likely, this cast is so amazing and so respectful and so loving. I could not even imagine them needing me for anything.
Okay.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah.
And Joy, how do people find you if they're interested in the work that you do?
My website is joydemichelle.com. That's JoyDemichelle.com.
Mm-hmm.
Or Acting with Joy, that also leads there. And my social media handles are Acting with Joy.
Wonderful.
Yes.
Okay, excellent.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you so
All
much.
right. Thank you.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Break a leg.
Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you for listening to this edition of Two Soca. You know where you can find us. We are on Instagram at Two Sisters of a Certain Age. You can find us on YouTube at Two Soca, and you can reach out to us at our email, which is twosocapodcast@gmail.com.
Don't forget to like, review, and share with family and friends. We would love to have you help us grow our audience and spread the word that at Two Sisters of a Certain Age, we can relate. Thanks, everybody.
No Longer Network.